Former presidential candidate Ralph Nader is here with his take on Donald Trump, the Democratic primaries, and he'll weigh in on the likelihood of a third-party candidate jumping into the race. It's all next on this edition of Politicking. Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King. Public interest activist, four-time presidential candidate Ralph Nader has joined me many, many times over the years to talk politics and his proposed policies for banking and tax reform, wealth distribution, and America's role in the world. But with 2016 being unlike any political year we've ever seen, my recent conversation with Ralph also turned to the nomination process of the parties and the success of outsider candidates like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, and why the rhetoric from each seems to resonate so well with the electorate. Ralph's no stranger to presidential races. He's run for the Oval Office 4 times, twice as the Green Party candidate, also as an independent candidate in 2004 and 2008, and he joined me from Washington, D.C. for a wide-ranging conversation. Here's that interview. What has been your general reaction to the election so far?
Well, I think except for the Democratic side, the dialogue reached a new low week after week after week with these attacks by Trump and others countering Trump, not on so much policy, not on the future direction of the country and its impact on the war, but, you know, reacting to phrases like Lying Ted and Little Marco. I've never seen anything like it. I don't think there's an example in American history where there is this constant personalization and negativity by the Republicans, and apparently it worked for Donald Trump. On the Democratic side, there should have been more debates. I think the Democratic National Committee was tilted in favor of Hillary, which meant fewer debates, not more debates, and they were placed at a time when they could have gotten a maximum audience. They pitted them against some popular sports events in some cases. But here's Bernie Sanders. He starts out with 3%, Larry. Senator from a little state in Vermont, had no money, refused at the outset to take PAC money or super PAC. And now he's higher in the polls against Trump than Hillary. And I think personally, he would have won against Hillary if you had an open primary and independent voters were able to vote instead of the closed primaries in such states, big states as New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and other states. Every time there's an open primary, he's winning. West Virginia was an open primary. He won. Independent voters are overwhelmingly for Bernie. So it's quite an achievement, isn't it?
How do you explain this year two candidates so different, one on the left, one, I guess, partially on the right, both anti-establishment, Sanders and Trump, coming to such prominence? Why?
I think first, they appear authentic, and only one, I think, is authentic, Bernie Sanders. But tell it like it is, Donald. You say what's on your mind. You don't get politically correct self-censorship. And that appealed. I think he got huge excess media compared to the other Republican candidates. And he became more outrageous the more attention he got. Then the other thing is, he's rich. People like rich candidates. They think they can't be bought. He said he's not taking special interest money. There are a lot of people who like that. And he says he's going to take on the people who are selling out America or cutting bad trade deals. And he's the father authority figure. Don't worry, I'm going to get you jobs. I'm going to protect you from all these immigrants, build a wall. So he assuaged people's anxieties who don't spend much time getting behind the screen of these politicians. Bernie, I think, is the real thing. He's scandal-proof, amazing. All these years, no scandals. He's gaffe-proof. I mean, even you, Larry, couldn't get him to produce a gaffe. He's very well disciplined, and look how far he's gone. He could have beat Hillary if there were open primaries And those rigged superdelegates, 25% of the total, weren't Hillary's cronies. And look how close he came.
Is Hillary a disappointing candidate to you?
Very much so. I think, well, first of all, she has the second highest unfavorability ratings nationally, second only to Donald Trump, and they both set records for recent decades for unfavorability ratings.
Why is she unattractive to people? Her resume would say she's the most qualified person ever to run.
I think she says one thing and does another. She sweet talks people on the campaign trail, but people know that she's been paid $5,000 a minute to give speeches to big bankers and other corporate conventions in closed-door session, where presumably she, as the Wall Street Journal reported, gushed to them and said things to them she didn't want to say publicly, which is why she's not releasing her transcripts. I got a hold of the Harry Walker Lecture Agency transcript, Larry, not the transcript, the contract for on behalf of Hillary, and right in the contract it says that the sponsor, namely, say, the banking conventions or the Goldman Sachs people, were required to pay a stenographer $1,000 for a stenographic record for the exclusive use of Hillary Clinton. So she's got it, and she keeps delaying, says you won't give it out unless everyone else does. Well, Bernie said, I don't give these speeches, so you don't have me to use an excuse. And certainly Trump doesn't give high-paid speeches in closed doors before business conventions. So that's why. And she's also a militarist. She overrode Secretary of State Gates' opposition to toppling the government, the dictatorship in Libya. Look at the chaos now. And she voted for the war in Iraq. She's never met a weapon system or a war she hasn't liked. So, you know, you can't come on sweet and nice on behalf of single moms and kids when you're a militarist and a corporatist in real political life.
Stay right there. More with Ralph Nader right after this. If it's Hillary versus Trump in November, don't you have nowhere to go but her?
You always have somewhere to go. You can go Libertarian Party, Green Party, or write in a vote. And I believe in vote of conscience, not a tactical vote. If millions of people voted their conscience, Larry, I think we have better politics.
So you'll vote for neither?
Well, I never flagged my vote. Not even on the 3-hour radio show of Larry King when people had longer attention spans, huh, Larry?
Do you believe Hillary when she says climate change will be a priority if she's president?
Probably, if she can stand up to the oil, gas, coal industry and the nuclear industry. She certainly understands the issue. There's no doubt about that. I suspect she'd have a higher priority on that than Trump.
Do you think the environment's been discussed enough in these campaigns?
No, not enough, because part of the environment is occupational diseases in workplaces, gases, fumes, particulates. The other is more rigorous regulation of coal plants and auto companies. They're not talking about that. And of course, stopping fracking. Now, she was for fracking. Now she's saying we should be very careful with fracking. But that's part of the wishy-washiness that she projects to an increasingly distrustful voting public.
What is your opinion of the Bernie or bust movement?
Well, that's going to be very serious for the Democrats, because if she does not treat Bernie fairly at the convention and seriously consider his rules reforms like superdelegates and other things, she's going to alienate millions of Bernie followers, and they can stay home. You know, enough people stayed home in 2010 after Obama's win in 2008 to cause a landslide loss in the House of Representatives to the Democrats. So she's got to be very, very careful here with Bernie's millions of followers, many of them young. Easy for young people just to stay home if they're dismayed or disgusted.
Well, Bernie has verbally said he could never support any of the Republicans. Don't you think he will support Hillary if she's the nominee, and that he will ask his supporters to do the same?
He will do that, but I don't think he's going to go all over the country like a toady, mouthing plaudits every hour on behalf of Hillary. I think he's better advised, and I wrote a column on this, which people can get free every week on nader.org, that basically said, what is the long-range rebound for Bernie Sanders? And I think it's leading a civic mobilization with big rallies in the fall on his agenda and more, where he would then be able to address large rallies regionally around the country. Now, these rallies do not have to be for a particular candidate. They can say to the political establishment, we the people, including left, right, we want these changes. We want these redirections. I don't care who listens, whether it's Trump or Hillary or anybody. We're telling you, Washington, D.C., you better heed us. That's what I think he should do.
Does he get a big voice at the Democratic convention in Philadelphia?
Yes, they're going to give him a primetime slot. That's sort of the SOP. But you know, how many people remember primetime speeches at conventions, Larry? That's not much of a concession, and I don't think he's going to accept only that. He's going to be much more demanding. I mean, just put yourself in his place. He feels he could have beat her if the rules were fair. That is, if all delegates were elected, not selected as superdelegate cronies of Hillary. That's 25%. Or closed primaries. He could have won with open primaries. So he's going to be pretty upset, pretty determined. He's going to support the nominee, whoever the nominee is for the Democratic Party. But he's going to want a lot more. And we're having a big civic mobilization just at the right time, May 23, 24, 25, 26, at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., to jumpstart the arousal and intensification of the civil society. You know, the civil society is kind of removed from the election process. The Sunday shows on TV, they don't want to hear from citizen groups who know what's going on, who know the best about what's for this country. It's all politicians and their consultants. So I think this is going to be the Super Bowl of citizen action.
And
is
is there
community? I can go to breakingthroughpower.org and see about tickets. And if you can't afford them, we have a lot of scholarships. Breakingthroughpower.org.
And that's when?
May 23, Monday, 24, 25, 26. One is on breaking through power, how 18 groups have done it for decades. One is on breaking through the media that excludes serious content increasingly. It's not like the old days even. We had Phil Donahue, had Larry King, you had Johnny Carson, had Gore Vidal on Empire several times. Can you imagine Jimmy Fallon today doing that? And day 3 is breaking through war, waging peace over waging war with a lot of veterans and veteran scholars and peace groups. And Phil Donahue is going to be there. Patti Smith's going to be there.
Wow.
And the day 4 is breaking through Congress with a citizen summons we want to spread in all congressional districts, where the citizens summon the senators and representatives to organize town meetings for action. So that's why we call it the Super Bowl of civic action.
And that's in Washington at Constitution Hall?
That's right. Storied, historic Constitution Hall, the greatest gathering of civic activist groups on more issues, subjects, redirections, and reforms ever in American history.
That's the amazing Ralph Nader, who never has gone back to the porch. He's gotten off the porch and waged the good fight. We'll have some more moments with Ralph Nader right after this message. Don't go away. Welcome back to Politicking. Let's get back to my recent conversation with Ralph Nader, public interest activist, 4-time presidential candidate. He joined me from Washington, D.C. to talk about the 2016 race and his complaints with the Democratic Party's nomination process, among other topics. Here's the conclusion of that interview. Do you think Bernie will get some planks in the Democratic platform?
Well, here's what he wants. I think he wants full Medicare for all with free choice of doctor and hospital. He's not going to get that. I think he wants a Wall Street speculation tax. He's not going to get that. He wants a $15 minimum wage. He may get it spread over 10 years. Hillary's already at 12, and that took some doing, by the way, over recent years. And so he may get that. He wants to revise the trade agreements. He'll get rhetoric on that. Hillary's very good with Bernie mimic rhetoric. He'll get rhetoric. But as you know, Larry, from your long experience in politics, it doesn't matter what's in the platform. Sometimes it's not worth the paper it's written on.
Is there a vice presidential candidate that Hillary could select that would make you vote for that ticket?
No, because the president dominates everything. The vice president is at the service and orders of the president. But it would be smart if she nominated somebody like Sherwood Brown, the senator from Ohio. He's a progressive, and he's probably smacking his knees for not running. He didn't run because he didn't think he'd raise enough money. Now look what Bernie's done with a $27 average contribution.
The problem with picking Brown is Kasich would then appoint a Republican senator.
Well, that could be true. But as you know, Ohio is one of the two biggest swing states that the Democrats have to get, along with Florida.
Do you ever regret running?
I regret not winning. Bush took a lot of votes from me. So did Gore. That may sound like a joke, but if we all have equal right to run for election, we're either all spoilers of one another because we want all votes from one another, or none of us are spoilers.
But you changed
the Constitution.
No, you changed the world. Don't you ever say to yourself, if I didn't run, Gore would be president? If Gore were president, there probably would have been an Iraq war.
No, because 250,000 Democrats in Florida voted for Bush, and Gore and Clinton bombed Iraq in the late 1990s, as you know, from time to time. And they got a resolution through Congress saying it was the policy of the U.S. government to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Now, I wouldn't be so eager to conclude that after 9/11, Gore wouldn't have done the same thing. But the point is that the Democrats could have stopped George Bush. They had to filibuster votes to stop him from invading Iraq and to stop him from those tax cuts for the wealthy and the corporations in 2001 and 2. So they're the ones who have the votes. I think Gore, by the way, if he was on your program, Al, and you asked him that question, he'd say, I don't begrudge the Green Party. I think I lost because of the Supreme Court. 5-4, Republicans did him in. Gore won the popular vote by 500,000, lost the Electoral College, which is antiquated and should be abolished. And I think he would point to Florida as a series of stolen votes by the Republican state government and Catherine Harris, not to mention he was sabotaged by 250,000 Democrat voters in Florida who voted for Bush. He's quite fair-minded, actually, on this.
Ralph, it's always great talking to you. It's going to be a great event in Washington. I salute you.
Thank you. If you're in Washington, drop by. We'll beat the drums for you, Larry.
I'll try to get there. Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you.
If you haven't heard about Bryan Cranston's portrayal of President Lyndon Johnson in All the Way, you probably will very shortly. He's already won the Tony for the stage production, and now he's bringing the role to HBO. The director of the film, Jay Roach, is no stranger to politically charged movies. He also directed Recount in 2008 and The Great Game Change in 2012, as well as the Oscar-nominated film Trumbo last year. Roach stopped by to talk about bringing All the Way to HBO, and we got into a little politics as well. Here's some of that interview. What's your take on Trump?
You know, I said something in one interview when we were releasing Trumbo. I just said, isn't wisdom a minimum basic requirement for leadership in our country? Do we think of Trump as a wise man? And that's what I look for in leaders, people who have wisdom and not ego. I think wisdom should be a much, much higher ranking virtue than ego and the ability to...
So how do you account for it?
I think, again, I think there's a steady campaign from the right, primarily, to delegitimize government, to look at real hard-working civil servants as the enemy of what it means to be American. I think the popularity of politicians is low, partly because of some bad behavior by politicians, but it's very low also because there's a 24-hour-a-day campaign, a propaganda campaign to actually make government look like the problem and not the solution. So you're electing people who go into government thinking government is not functional, and then they make it dysfunctional, fulfill that prophecy, and then run on let's trash government. People who believed in government could actually do good things. People who don't believe in government are never going to fulfill anything with that.
You directed Game Change about the McCain, Palin.
Yeah.
Some people think that it was Sarah Palin that led not only to Obama's 8 years, but might lead to Hillary's 8 years, that
Yeah.
she took down the Republican Party.
I subscribe to that philosophy to some extent. I think that Sarah Palin, in a way, paved the way for Trump. I think that someone could be so popular and so unprepared for the office she sought and still somehow be taken seriously, gave license for someone like Trump to think with no experience in politics. I mean, the comparison between someone like Trump and someone like LBJ with all his years of legislative experience, which actually led to him being a great president in those first 2 years at least, passing so much legislation that was good for Americans, all Americans. The difference is astonishing, and I think without Palin, that's part of what the story was about. Steve Schmidt, played by Woody Harrelson in the film, as he realizes what he's released, there's a tremendous amount of regret. Keep in mind that entire story is from the point of view of Republicans. There's hardly any Democrats in the story. So there is a sense of what have we done? What have we created? And that's what made that story worth telling.
We'll continue the conversation with Jay Roach right after the break. Bryan Cranston recently visited the White House, met with Obama, and the president credited Johnson's civil rights laws for ultimately leading the election of representatives who look like me. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Would you consider the film timely given what's going on now in North Carolina with LGBT?
Absolutely. In fact, I just saw yesterday the Attorney General is suing the state using the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this very act that's passed during our film, because it included clauses on discrimination based on sex. It's a perpetual battle for civil rights. Whatever class gets sort of scapegoated as being the problem class that people decide to turn against. And it's unfortunate that you can't just pass an act and it just goes away. It takes years of battle at every level, and there is progress, as Dr. King said. The moral arc bends towards justice, but very slowly, and it's painful how slow sometimes.
The film centers around LBJ's efforts to get the Civil Rights Act passed. Is that history we should know more about?
Well, it may be that people have forgotten, because of Vietnam and other things, how much Johnson cared about civil rights, and it was such a strange choice for him to take that on and alienate so many of his Southern friends. But he had to work very closely with the civil rights leaders, and they were, they really drove him to take it very seriously. He cared about it too, but what I like about what Robert Schenken's screenplay did is introduce people to some of the grassroots civil rights leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer, who fought to get seated in the Democratic convention from Mississippi when there were no black representatives in a state that was almost half African American. Or David Dennis, who stood up after the murders of the 3 civil rights workers. And those characters, for me, were very inspiring. And I think they, in a way, were scary to Johnson because they represented the sort of powder keg that was about to erupt if something didn't happen. And that, I think, unfortunately, many of the issues in civil rights are still here with us. Who knew after all these years we would still be fighting for justice?
Voting rights, they're trying to kill that.
Voting rights, which I got to know so well in doing Recount in 2000. I'm very humbled by what's happened since then. I thought our film would trigger all kinds of voter reform, and because it was so much about purging voters and suppressing voting, making voting more difficult. Instead, it's, in a way, it was almost like a training film, I feel like, for people to learn to manipulate the system by suppressing votes. It was really a painful reality.
The power of Johnson was amazing. I interviewed Everett Dirksen during the civil rights battle. Lyndon Johnson called him into the office, put his arms around him and said, "You're going to support this because it's right."
That's in our film. You'll love the scene because it's one of those great moments that Johnson delivered the Texas twist, or the Johnson treatment, as it was called, where he would get right in your face and talk to you a couple inches away and flatter you, and then slowly start to kind of press you and make you feel like you will be ashamed if you don't get on my side of history.
All the Way, directed by Jay Roach, starring Bryan Cranston, is also available on HBO beginning May 21st. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Politicking. Remember, you can join the conversation on my Facebook page, check out the Politicking blog on our homepage, or tweet me at King's Things. And don't forget, use the Politicking hashtag. And that's all for this edition of Politicking.